Okay, thank you everyone for joining this subcommittee today for a roundtable discussion on the opinions on how to reinvigorate the critical domestic maritime industry. This is new to me, never done a roundtable. Of course, the table's not even round, rectangular table. How about that? So during World War II, mobilization of the United States shipbuilding industry base allowed the country to produce vessels at a stunning rate, building over 5,000 ships that helped deliver Allied troops and supplies needed for both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. This rate of production was critical, given the dangers these vessels and the mariners on board faced from enemy attacks. Merchant Marines experienced the highest proportion of casualties relative for any other branch of the United States military during the war. The strength and efficiency of our country's maritime industry ultimately was a key factor in the Allied victory and the conclusion of World War II. The United States possessed the largest merchant fleet in the world. However, maritime industry, both domestically and internationally, has changed dramatically since that time. The closure and consolidation of shipyards across the country has left us only a handful of domestic facilities capable of producing large ocean-going vessels, while China has grown their shipbuilding capacity exponentially in the last 2 decades. Through the deep government support, the United States flagged fleet, which once accounted for half the world's cargo shipping capacity in 1950, has dwindled to account of less than 1% of the tonnage today. Many companies have chosen to register their vessels with foreign countries to take advantage of the less stringent regulations. As a member of the United States flagged vessel, as the number of those vessels have declined, so too have the mariners needed to crew the ships. In 2017, the Maritime Administration estimated that we face a shortfall of about 1,800 qualified licensed, unlicensed mariners to crew our sea lift vessels for a prolonged period. Looking back at our history, it is vital that we find a way now to strengthen the maritime industry and ensure that we can deliver assets and train mariners we need both in times of peace and war. I appreciate all of you for being here and look forward to what you have to say. Now turn it over to our ranking member of our committee, Mr. Graves. No. Get ahead of myself. Mr. Larson, you're recognized.
Thanks. By custom and kindness of saluti lets me speak first. I appreciate that very much. Rank has its privileges, also its responsibilities. So, but I want to thank the panel for participating today in the roundtable. I've gotten to know many of you over 24 years in Congress, and I'm positive that you will all, working together, bring some ideas to help us reinvigorate America's shipbuilding economy. The U.S. maritime industry generates over $150 billion in annual economic output. It sustains more than 650,000 jobs. I'm proud to support the industry and its contribution to national and economic security. Unfortunately, certain sectors of industry have experienced a decline in recent years due to unfair and heavily subsidized foreign competition. The U.S. maritime industry serves an important role and relies on a critical portfolio of federal programs. Because of the Jones Act, we have American-owned, American-built, and American-crewed vessels serving our domestic commerce. Because of the Maritime Security Program, the Tanker Security Program, and cargo preference laws, the Department of Defense can rely on American ships and American mariners to deliver critical cargoes throughout the world. Because of the Small Shipyard Grant Program and demand generated by the Jones Act, we are able to maintain vital domestic shipbuilding capacity. Now, in recent years, China has invested over $132 billion in its shipping and shipbuilding industries. If we are to remain competitive in our maritime industry, we have to act. American shipyards and mariners are incredibly capable, and they deserve a level playing field. To provide this, we must ensure full funding for the Maritime Security Program and the Tanker Security Program, expand and ensure full compliance with cargo preference requirements, and defeat baseless attacks on the Jones Act. Further, we have to consider new ways to support the American maritime industry. Ultimately, ships will not be built and operated unless there's cargo to carry. So I look forward to this panel today providing this committee actionable ideas on ways to increase the competitiveness of the maritime industry, including ways to increase the availability of cargo. And with that, and before I yield back, I do have to apologize to the panel. I had planned to be here for a while. Things are moving around in my schedule, and so I do have to leave right now, but I want to be sure I made the statement and got some word in edgewise before Salud started to speak. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Chairman Webster, for calling together this roundtable of industry experts to discuss how we can reinvigorate the U.S. maritime industry. We all know how valuable the maritime industry is to the economy and our national security. Over the past year, we have had to fight off repeated attacks on the Jones Act, a fundamental pillar of U.S. maritime policy for our country, or for over a century. As an avid supporter of the Jones Act, I have helped fight back these challenges because the national security and economic contributions of the maritime industry is simply too significant to remain indifferent. In California alone, the industry employs more than 51,450 individuals, produces $12.21 billion for the local economy, and generates $3.6 billion in worker income. I'm sure that number has grown only since the study was done in 2019. We all have a stake in maintaining and growing a vibrant, diverse, and globally competitive U.S. maritime industry. This was true in the 18th century, and it remains true today. The United States is a great maritime nation. However, to remain so in the future, we must support U.S. maritime and shipbuilding industry. American mariners are our greatest assets, and it is imperative we protect them. To maintain a vibrant industry and to provide good-paying jobs, we must ensure a culture where sexual assault and harassment does not exist. It is important that the Coast Guard plays a central role in receiving reports, tracking, and taking action against bad actors. I'm also glad that the majority of industry has embraced the new law to ensure the safety of mariners at sea. If we work together, I am sure this panel will have new innovative ideas on reinvigorating U.S. shipbuilding and U.S. shipbuilding while growing our mariner pool. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Okay, I'm going to ask each of the, we'll call you witnesses, witness to what's happening, who are going to participate, starting with Ms. Carpenter, and we'll just go right down the line and give yourself some comments, keep them short. We're not going to run the timer, so, but 2 minutes seems like a good time. So you recognize Ms. Carpenter.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to try to keep it to well under 2 minutes. What I want to start by saying is thank you very much to you, to Mr. Carbajal, to this subcommittee for having this conversation. I'm here today wearing 2 hats. My day job is as president and CEO of the American Waterways Operators, which is the National Trade Association for the tugboat, towboat, and barge industry, the largest segment of the U.S. domestic maritime fleet. My side hustle is as president of the American Maritime Partnership, which is the broadest, deepest domestic maritime coalition in the U.S. We bring together vessel owners, shipyards, maritime labor, pro-defense organizations to do one thing, and that is to support the Jones Act, which is the foundation and must remain the foundation of a national maritime strategy. It is really gratifying to see the bipartisan support of this subcommittee and the committee overall, and the renewed attention in Congress from the Navy, from Transcom, in making sure that we are building on the successful foundation of the Jones Act and really ensuring that this country has the fleet that we need to deal with unprecedented threats. I mean, China, I know we're going to talk a lot about it today, but it is absolutely essential that we take note of the really existential threat that is posed by China's attempts to expand its power globally, using the maritime industry as a key weapon. The Jones Act ensures that our domestic supply chain can't be held hostage, weaponized against us. It starts with protecting the Jones Act, but there is so much more that we need to do, and I look forward to the discussion today and the ideas for how we can get there. So thank you, and I'll stop there.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Chris Johnson. I'm chair of USA Maritime, and USA Maritime is a coalition of all of the U.S. flag shipping companies in the Maritime Security Program and all of the U.S. maritime unions who provide U.S. citizen crews to operate those vessels. Let me provide a little perspective on the current state of the maritime industry, at least on the shipping side of it. After World War II, as you alluded to, we had more than 5,000 U.S. flag ships. We controlled 40 to 45% of the global shipping market under U.S. flag. Today, unfortunately, we're down to 90 U.S. flag ships, give or take a few, operating in international trade. 98% of the cargo moving in and out of U.S. ports comes on foreign-owned, foreign-flag ships with foreign crew. Roughly only 2% is moving on U.S. flag vessels. That is something that, in our view, is a national security concern of the highest order, and we look forward to working with you and this subcommittee and the Congress on a bold, new, aggressive plan to reinvigorate this industry. I can tell you the Chinese have a plan. It's sophisticated. It has been in place for a long time. Today, China has somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 Chinese flag vessels operating across the globe. And if we are going to reassert our maritime dominance on the globe, across the globe, we need to have a very aggressive and bold plan, and many of us here today are happy to engage in some of the details of what that might entail. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Chairman Webster and Ranking Member Carvajal, and members of the subcommittee. It's a good opportunity for the Shipbuilders Council of America to be part of this conversation. Obviously, you're talking about revitalizing our U.S. flag fleets and also the shipyard industry. I have the unique privilege of not only representing all those big Navy shipyards and big Coast Guard shipyards, but all the other shipyards that we don't talk about. All those shipyards that build for AWO and for a lot of our members for domestic markets. So honored to be here today. Looking forward to a lot of good questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jim Patty, President of the Maritime Institute for Research and Industrial Development, a DC-based association representing the U.S. flag shipping companies having a collective bargaining relationship with the Masters, Mates, and Pilots Union. Masters, Mates, and Pilots Union, along with the American Maritime Officers and the Marine Engineers Beneficial Association, provide the trained and qualified American maritime officers that crew all types of vessels engaged in our nation's foreign and domestic shipping trades. Let me say at the outset that maritime unions greatly appreciate your efforts today, Mr. Webster, Mr. Carvajal, the members of the subcommittee, and the full committee for scheduling this roundtable. Clearly, we are at a serious point when bold and innovative action is necessary to increase the number of vessels operating under the U.S. flag in the foreign trades, to reverse and resolve the growing and worsening American maritime manpower shortage, and to substantially increase the amount of cargo, especially commercial cargo, carried by U.S. flag vessels. And there's just one point I'd like to make at this time. As we work together to develop and hopefully implement a new national maritime strategy, it's important to remember that there are things that Congress can do now to provide a significant boost to the U.S. flag maritime industry. We're hoping that Congress will follow the lead of the Committee on Armed Services and approve and provide the funding necessary to increase the stipend available to vessels enrolled in the Maritime Security Program. It's been a number of years since that stipend has increased, notwithstanding inflationary costs and other costs throughout the U.S. economy. And going from $5.3 million per ship to $6.5, as approved by the House Armed Services Committee and included in their defense authorizations legislation, would demonstrate a significant commitment on the part of Congress to begin to address the policies and the problems affecting our U.S. flag industry and to begin to reverse this downward trend. So again, I thank you very, very much on behalf of the American Maritime Officers Unions, and again, look forward to working with this committee as we try to develop and hopefully implement a new Merchant Marine Act of 1924 and 1925. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Shaneman. I'm with the Seafarers Union. I turned 47 on Friday. I have spent most of my adult life in this room, okay? For the last 20 years, I've been working for the Seafarers and other maritime unions on these issues. And I have watched as John and Reed and Cheryl and Matt and I and the others have all nibbled about the edges on these issues. And I'm telling you guys, we don't have time to do that anymore. We have got to go big. We have got to go strong. We have got to put together a Merchant Marine Act of 2025 that is comprehensive, that addresses everything from the mariner shortage to the cargo shortage to the shipyards to building ships, Navy stuff, Merchant Marine stuff, everything. We got to put it together. We're running out of time. Our strategic opponents in China are not. They are kicking our butts. They have thousands and thousands of very large ships in their fleet. We do not. They have tens of thousands of mariners coming out of their training schools every year. We do not. And we can't afford to let them eat our lunch anymore. We can't afford it. So we need to go big. And that means we're going to have to make a lot of decisions and talk about a lot of things in this room that we have steered away from for the last 20 years because they've been politically difficult to talk about. That means taxes. That means appropriations. That means lots of money going to ships and shipyards and mariners. It means new ideas that we haven't talked about in 50, 60 years, commercial cargo preference. It's about going from 50% cargo preference now to 100%. We've got to talk about all of these issues because we are not going to get there. We're not going to fix what's broken in our industry with half measures. We've tried that. It doesn't work. We've got to move forward, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we do that.
Good morning, sir. My name is Jim Watson. I'm retired from the U.S. Coast Guard, retired in 2012, and then became the director over at the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement in the Interior Department, and then I became a senior vice president at the American Bureau of Shipping. So my long career has been very closely involving the maritime community, and over that period of time, I've seen what's happened to our maritime. It's shrunk. We have, I think, done wonderful things for safety, for environmental protection, but we've let the industry deteriorate in terms of its capacity to build ships, its capacity to cruise ships, and its capacity to own ships. I think we have actually created some barriers that need to be removed as quickly as possible. This urgency that I'm hearing to my right is exactly what the American people need to hear. And so to that end, in my retirement, I was one of the authors of a book that we actually titled 0.4, which, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, is the percentage of U.S. flagships against the world's fleet of 55,000. So we are totally dependent on foreign flag ships at this point, even for our military. I think U.S. Transcom would have to go to foreign flag ships to support military deployment, to support the oil needed to fuel the ships and the food and all the rest of the supply they would need. So something needs to be done really quickly. My mission that I've taken on is to underpin whatever you all can do by communicating through something like these publications to the American people what we knew, but they don't even realize. We've talked to people over and over again. They think, you know, their cargo, that the stuff they're buying from China comes in on a U.S. ship. They think 30–40% of the ships in the world are U.S., and that's absolutely wrong. We need to correct that, and then people need to take action. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for the chance to speak here today in this roundtable. It's a new format for me. Brent Sadler, a senior research fellow from the Heritage Foundation, but before that, 27-year Navy veteran. A lot of that was in the Western Pacific, and intimately familiar with our adversary, the Chinese, both in the economic competition, but of course also with the military one. And as already stated, the Chinese made a decision in 1998 with their first maritime white paper that they were going to make shipping and shipbuilding a strategic interest, a strategic enterprise. We have yet to do that, and so the time has come that I think we need to recognize the strategic imperative before us to strengthen our maritime and how important it is to everyday Americans' livelihoods. So looking forward, we can't continue to do more of the same. We have to have more creative thinking. We have to approach this problem comprehensively. Cargo, of course, is king. Shipping exists to move things and people. It requires, of course, ships of various classes, sizes, and purposes. It requires the ports, and it requires the merchant mariners and the people that keep those ships functioning. And that is that commercial maritime industrial. It is the foundation on which your Navy and your Coast Guard functions. And we're seeing that the weakness and the atrophy in this industry, this maritime sector, is having dire consequences on our military. And so those two are connected intimately. So we have to embrace this comprehensively. It's going to take a decade to actually reverse the course and actually get to where we need to be. But the time for action is now, and it's still urgent. It took the Chinese about 10 years to take the lead in the shipbuilding and shipping industry. We don't have that time for effects, but more for that in the discussion, the roundtable. The last thing, and again, I also want to mention there's a human capital piece, there's a human factor to this, and I think it's worth another birthday that's today. Today, Bob Bessel is a merchant mariner, veteran of World War II with lots of experience. He turns 103 today. A reminder of his life story, who was honored by the Secretary of the Navy, of what this nation will need and what kind of courage and commitment we're going to have to rely on to succeed in a crisis and a war that might be on us this decade. He's 103. There's not many left like him with that experience, and I definitely want to take the time to make sure that we acknowledge the courage and the contribution that merchant mariners have made and will make as we go forward. Thanks.
Start with the questions. I'll ask the first one to all the participants. What do you think the #1 impediment to having a robust shipbuilding and also a fleet of U.S. flagged ships that could compete with the world? So maybe we'll just throw that out there, see what you have. This is kind of informal. Not using the gavel, not using the timer. Just somebody jump in.
All right,
I'll jump on the shipbuilding side of things. Mr. Chairman, I think what we've seen in the shipbuilding industry is when you have market volatility, you have real problems maintaining the workforce, having investments in infrastructure. So how do you maintain that how do you get rid of that volatility? One of the things we always support is full enforcement of the Jones Act. This committee had the wisdom to pass a provision where you realize the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act should apply to renewable energy offshore. Well, because this committee did that and worked with the House Armed Services Committee, now we're building ships for offshore wind. That's the right thing to do. So that market became certain because we clarified the law and made sure that was there. On the government customer side of things, sir, we have budgets that don't get passed. We have continuing resolutions. We have 10 years of sequestration. What we really do need to do is have a steady, healthy Navy and Coast Guard shipbuilding budget with multi-year contracts of multiple types and types of ships and get to the business of work. If we did that, if we maintained a healthy, optimized throughput in our shipyards, you would see more innovation, you would see more efficiencies, and you would see a greater workforce. That all being said, that's all in the face of, from 2010 to 2018, China dropped $132 billion in direct subsidies into their shipyards. So when we get compared to how much a Chinese ship is cost, and we're 4 times more expensive, that's not a fair comparison because those subsidies, drastically reduce the price of those ships, and that's why we really don't compete in that international market. So I would say to this group, having stability in the shipbuilding sector, having that clear demand signal in both the commercial side and the government side will help the industrial base grow, help the workforce stay. The biggest thing we have when budgets break is that workforce goes away. So that's the 2 things I would observe on the shipbuilding side of things, sir.
Mr. Chairman, in terms of ship operations, I think there's a significant number of impediments, but I think first and foremost, what we really need at this point in time is a clearer, stronger commitment and recognition on the part of the government that the industry can't do this alone. We can't expect the industry alone to compete with China. We can't expect a U.S. flag industry that employs American mariners, that complies with American standards, whether they be environmental or labor or anything in between, to compete with flag of convenience operations, where their whole premise behind such operations is the lowest to low. You're paying substandard subsistence wages at best if you're paying your mariners at all. You're not complying with the same standards we comply with. So we need that recognition on the part of the government that there has to be a mutual effort, industry and government working together. We have to look at these programs. The Maritime Security Program is not predicated on creating parity between the operation of U.S. flagships and foreign flag vessels. Cargo preference program still allows a certain percentage of taxpayer-financed cargoes to go to foreign flag vessels. To us, that makes absolutely no sense. Anything financed by the American taxpayer should be first and foremost reserved for U.S. flag vessel operation. Now, if U.S. vessels are not available or not available at fair and reasonable rates, we don't want the cargo not to move. But we need to begin to address these programs, some of which will be politically difficult, some of which will generate opposition, but nevertheless, we need to have that partnership with the government. And it really, as Brian, as Mr. Sadler, as Jim Watson just said, we need to be making these decisions now if in fact we're going to begin to reverse these trends.
Mr. Chairman, I would add just a few comments to those. So when you're looking at the competitiveness of U.S. flag shipping, you have to look at the Jones Act and international trade separately. In the Jones Act, as both Matt and Jennifer have mentioned, the companies are only competing against other American companies. In the foreign trade, where our members are operating between the United States and foreign ports, we're competing in the international market against international flag carriers who have built their ships, often in China, that are heavily subsidized. The operations of those ships are heavily subsidized. The ship owner is paying no tax. The crew on those ships paying no tax on their income. The regulatory requirements are significantly lower than the Coast Guard requirements that Admiral Watson used to enforce. So the international market is substantially different than the Jones Act market, and it is extremely competitive with all of these thousands of ships that are operating. In the case of Chinese ships, it's sort of an arm of the Communist Party of China with billions of dollars of subsidy behind it. Years ago in the United States, we had the construction differential subsidy program, which allowed for ships to be built in the United States with the aid of government support. Members of USA Maritime built lots of ships in U.S. shipyards back then. The problem now, of course, is, as Matt mentioned, it's more expensive to build a ship for the international trades in a U.S. shipyard than a foreign shipyard. And if you're a ship owner and you're trying to compete internationally and you are operating a vessel that has a much higher capital cost than all of your competitors, it doesn't take, a Harvard MBA to understand that you're not going to be in that business for very long. So that's point one. The other point I would make, as Jim and I think a few others have mentioned, is cargo. In order for a shipping company to operate profitably, obviously you have to have cargo. In the United States, we have a number of programs that funnel U.S. government cargo to U.S. flag ships. We're fully supportive of those. Those need to be preserved and enhanced. But if we're really going to grow the fleet and get to 175 or 200 U.S. flag ships, it's going to be with commercial cargo. And we need to work with you and everybody in this room to create an environment where people who control significant amount of cargo move their cargo on U.S. flag ships internationally instead of foreign flag ships. And we've got a lot of ideas on how to do that, but if we're really going to grow the fleet, we've got to deal with that. And then the last thing I would say is we need to invest in training the mariner workforce. Because if we build the ships and we buy the ships and we're ready to operate them, we obviously need trained American citizens to crew the ships. And we need to spend substantially more in training mariners, not only at Kings Point and not only at the existing state maritime academies, but more broadly, we probably need to create some new academies because if we're going to grow the fleet, we need to make sure we have the sufficient number of trained mariners to operate those vessels. I'll stop there.
Let me just say, I think one really fundamental point to keep in mind is it starts with clarity of purpose. And that's where I think, this subcommittee has such a crucial opportunity to lead. And we see that, and it works in the Jones Act sector, right? Because Congress said very clearly in the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, it is necessary for the national defense of the United States. And that guided all subsequent actions. And so recognizing the criticality of controlling our supply chain, Congress in effect said, you know what, this conversation is not about whether we could get a Bangladeshi crewed, Panamanian flag vessel to move cargo on our internal waters. We're saying it is necessary for the national defense of the United States that we do that here. And our policy is going to be guided by that objective. And I think we've got to have the same conversation in the international domain. Maritime is not just any other industry out there. It is a critical tool of our homeland security, our economic security, our national security. We need to be able to protect ourselves at home. We need to be able to project U.S. power in an extraordinarily dangerous world. Having articulated that, we then need to set clear goals for what we want to accomplish, and then policies will flow from that, as opposed to kind of starting, maybe if we tinkered around here, maybe if we did that, what's the goal? And then let's let the actions start from there. And we thank you for really starting this conversation because it's so much needed.
If I may, the think tanker in me has kind of jumped in with the name tag sideways. So the answer to your question is, and I think this echoes what you're hearing across the table here, is a lack of competitiveness and the need to actually try to target and to grow our market share on a global scale. That requires a comprehensive approach, as everyone is saying. But how do you actually get to, and what will be the American comparative advantage? That's the open question. There are some ideas, but it can't just be the shipping. It has to be a comprehensive logistics approach, a revolution in shipping, some people will say. And so there's a lot there that we have an advantage that the Chinese don't. Geography plays in that. But we have to have a positive vision as to what our comparative advantage is going to be in this sector. And that's what we should be taking our long-term investments and our focus on at the same time. Near term, things like the Jones Act are a fact of life. The industry relies on it. You cannot not acknowledge that fact. But that alone, and continuing that same business practices, is not going to get us to that competitive place that we need to be. So we need things like technological innovation incubators, maritime innovation incubator, focused in on the type of technologies brought together in a cocktail that is extremely competitive in a global environment. The other thing that we need is we need to have maritime prosperity zones where we can create the opportunities for investment, both from our allies as well as across the country, to invest in this sector because it is lucrative and because there is a comparative advantage that we're building to. This is one of the things the Chinese did when they set out in '98 their white paper. But we can't out-Chinese the Chinese. They are a state-controlled industry, and that's not going to work for America.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add that I think an impediment is the ignorance of most Americans about this industry, the fact that they just take it for granted and that it's actually something that the government of the United States has very little control over. And that there's actually some big opportunities, as Brent mentioned there, that we're leaving opportunities on the table that should be for American private investment, for stock market investment into the U.S. maritime industries. I think if people understood—
Could you name one?
Excuse me?
Could you name one of those things we're leaving on the table?
Well, for example, there are lots of investments going on all around the world to create ships that will be less carbon burning. So, you know, there's a lot of new technologies that are going into ship designs. One of the areas I'm very interested in is nuclear. Small modular reactors are already designed and being built that could very easily power a commercial ship. We can't let the Chinese get ahead of us on that kind of technology, okay? It's a great opportunity. It would be ridiculous for us to not want to be involved in that, and yet, you know, there's no real discussion about how we're going to incentivize those kinds of investments into our own maritime, as opposed to waiting, like we've been doing, for ships to all be built in China. A lot of our investors from this country are sending their dollars to be used in a Chinese shipyard. They turn around and use it to invest in their Navy, because those same shipyards, all dual-use vessels that they're building there, and dual-use shipyards. I'll stop there.
Yeah, let me, if I can, since we're kind of like roundtable, let me jump in a little bit, because I spent a lot of time looking at that, because in order to get that comparative advantage and start to seize market share and to help attract more investment, try to look at a lot of this question. One, the small modular nuclear reactors with IMO standards on green energy or less carbon emitting type of propulsion. This is perhaps the most effective, and it actually makes a lot of sense for large container type ships and even large tankers. That's going to take 5 or 6 years to mature, but that's a bet to be made. And if we don't act fast, the Chinese will have the first mover advantage. But this also needs to go in concert with several other interesting technologies. One, smart ports, like things that are being worked on right now in Ponce and in Puerto Rico. Also looking at drones, the ability to move cargo from ship to shore without having to come into ports, because to take advantage of economies of scale, it has a negative impact on the ports you can go to. So that also fulfills a military key operational problem. And then also having feeder vessels. So the ability to move cargo from ship to ship, not just liquid, like ship-to-ship oil transfers that we see the Russians type doing out at sea right now, but also containers. That, again, fulfills a key operational problem the military is also trying to struggle with, specifically the Marine Corps, when you look at what they're confronting in the first island chain. And that's kind of really animated a lot of where I'm coming from the Navy. But you asked for some specific things. The final one is the simple container. The revolution in shipping that came about with container shipping beginning in the late 50s really was because the form factor of the container. And so simply looking at how we can rethink the container, being reconfigurable for air shipment as well as moving from ship to ship and rapidly into smaller ports to feeder vessels, using blockchain to ease customs so that cargo can move securely and assuredly from a producer to a customer. These are all the things that have to come together, and by themselves aren't going to get us the comparative advantage that's going to outwit the Chinese. So we have to be very smart about how we do this.
Last but not least, I mean, to answer your question, the bottom line is we're not a priority. And Jennifer alluded to this. We're not a priority. Maritime has not been a priority for this country in a long time. And that's because we are the quiet service. We get it done. We're like the Coast Guard. We get it done with the minimal amount of effort, with the minimal amount of funding. We'll make it work. No matter what, we'll make it happen. And the problem is we've kind of gone to the end of that road. All right? Cost is the bottom line biggest driver for everything. It always has been. And I will tell you this, as a student of history, there has never been a time when the United States has had the cheapest merchant marine on the planet. Never, not once. Our ships were more expensive in 1776. They were more expensive in 1860. They're more expensive in 1920, and they're more expensive today. Why? Because Americans build them. And you're not going to take an American and pay him the minimum wage that a foreign seafarer is making, which is $800 a month, and get him to do that job. It's not going to happen. So we spend a lot of our time nibbling about the edges on these cost issues, when the reality is cost is a fact of life. We're never going to fix it. How do we get over that? Brett talked about technology. That's 100% true. We've got to be the innovators, and that's what we've done. I mean, containerization, Malcolm McLean invented that. That was Americans who made this happen. We are the ones who are always driving the next generation of technology, and we got to keep doing that. But we have to do it smart, and we have to do it right, and that's unfortunately not something that is quick either. So from our perspective, the quickest thing, the most important thing, the number one thing that needs to happen, Congress can help us with, the administration can do, is we have to say enough is enough, maritime needs to be a priority, and we have to put our money where our mouth is. That means in trade agreements. We love to give away the shop in these trade agreements. We never ask for anything. We say, all right, if you don't put any tariffs on an American ship, then we won't put tariffs on your ship. But that doesn't matter anymore because nobody does that. And all the folks that we're going against in the foreign trades are flying flags of convenience, as Jim mentioned. They're picking the state that they want to be a part of. You want to register a ship, you walk down to the Liberian Registry in Alexandria, Virginia, and you sign up for, actually I think it's Arlington, you sign up for it, and you pay some money, and boom, you got a ship registered there. You're never going to talk to anybody from the state of Liberia. You don't have to. You're going to talk to an American who works for them and who's going to hand you a piece of paper saying you can fly the flag of the ship on that ship. We're never going to be able to beat that. And why would we? Because we have the best flag state control in the world. We've got the best Coast Guard. We've got the best Navy. It meant something in World War I when there was a U.S. flag on the back of that ship. It gave people pause before they did something to that American ship. And it needs to do that again, which is one of the things I get frustrated when the Navy is spending all of its time shepherding every single ship that wants to go through the Red Sea. Why aren't we getting priority? We're the Americans, right? So from my perspective, the number one thing that we need to do, make maritime a priority again. You do that, and we will give you the solutions for a lot of these issues. On the cargo side, it's all about tax incentives. We have shippers in this country who are shipping millions and millions and millions of metric tons of cargo. They have no idea what ship it's going on, what the crew of that ship is, what language they speak, what flags. They don't care. They just need to make sure that the thing gets there. We're leaving on Friday, and it gets here on Monday, and it's in my warehouse by Tuesday so I can build this on Thursday. They need that. That's all they care about. We have to be able to demonstrate to them that they need to care about what country that ship is from, where it was built, who crews it, and it's as important to them as getting it there on time. If we don't do that, then none of this stuff is going to get fixed.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that we were gratified yesterday to see the Speaker of the House address this issue in his speech at the Hudson Institute. And he said, as many of you all may have noticed, that it is time to substantially increase the investment in the maritime industry. We completely agree with the Speaker. We are also very supportive of the effort that Congressman Waltz, Congressman Garamendi, Senator Kelly, and Senator Rubio have initiated. And they have a draft bill, as you all may know. We think a lot of those proposals are excellent. We have some ideas on how to improve that legislation, and we look forward to working with them and all of you as that process unfolds.
Anybody have a question? Okay.
I've really enjoyed this eye-opening experience here this morning, especially Mr.
Shaineman. It's Pennsylvania.
Common spelling.
Think about Boehner. There you go.
Okay.
Like that.
I mean, I would rather have straight talk than I had, and you hit it, and all of you have. Coming from a law enforcement life, we never get anything really done until we have a catastrophe. Something bad happens, everybody says, what do we do? And we jump through hoops to get it done. So this plain talk is the way to get it done. You know, we can, like you said, we've nibbled at it. And this is my first term here. We've nibbled at it just like we do, you know, after 9/11. You know, we had been playing with it, watching it, but not really doing anything about it. So you have my 100% support. Again, we don't want a catastrophe to happen, and it sounds like we're pretty close to me. So what I would like is to hear straight talk all the time, some of the political things that we can work through to get this done. I mean, just this nuclear thing, that was the first thing I thought of when you know, there's so many opportunities here for us to get back on, just like, you know, when you set up talk about the American flag, you know, when we show up, it's on. And it's time for us to show up again and to cut through the whining and why we can't and why we can't. And Americans make it happen. And, you know, I want to do whatever I can as a member of this committee to support you, to take your information, and let's put it to feet to the fire. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Anybody have a comment on that?
300%.
I'd just like to make a comment because you mentioned law enforcement, and that's near and dear to my heart as a Coast Guard officer. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference between a foreign flag vessel arriving and a U.S. flag that's in trade. And as a Coast Guard officer, that U.S. Coast Guard licensed merchant mariner is part of your team. I mean, you're surrounded by somebody you can trust, somebody that you know is going to respond if you need them to help you in your mission. Complete opposite when a foreign vessel, foreign crew comes in, and there's 80,000 of those every year coming into our ports. So you're asking the Coast Guard to enforce our laws on 80,000 arrivals a year, and there's only that tiny percentage, that 2%, that are people in that same career path that are Americans. We saw the Dolly incident. I mean, how could you expect a really thorough understanding of the material condition of that ship to be known by the port, by the Coast Guard, you know, by the pilots? It's just too hard unless they're actually one of us. And that's the difference between U.S. flag and foreign flag. So I just wanted to mention that because it sort of touches on how difficult the enforcement is.
Follow up, Mr. Chair, if I could. You mentioned that you would view these U.S. flag folks as a part of your team. They would respond when you call them. Practically speaking, how often does that request for assistance go out? And what does that look like?
Yeah, well, you know, the Coast Guard actually operates some fairly small vessels and helicopters. If there's an incident that's far off at sea, you're going to call the nearest ship. We have this program called AMVR, which is, they're all constantly reporting in. I've, as a captain of the port in 3 different ports in this country, you have to maintain this personal relationship with the pilots and with the ships that are operating in and out of your port, whether they're, right now, there's only the ships that you see going mostly in Jones Act. The ships that go into Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Alaska, because there's so few in some of our other ports, Baltimore is a great example, that are anything but foreign flag ships. So I've called upon merchant mariners to assist with salvage operations, with towing operations, with firefighting operations, with security operations after 9/11. It's just, you can't.
For that, 9/11, the boat lift.
Yes.
I mean, the bottom line was, we made it possible, working with the Coast Guard, every single ship that was available in Manhattan was taking people off the island, getting them across to Queens, getting them across on 9/11 when everything was shut down.
So there were no foreign flag vessels?
None.
None, not a single one. These were all Jones Act ships. They were all American ships. Coast Guard says, hey, we need help. They send the balloon up, and we're the first ones out there to get out and get it done. And there's a great YouTube video you can go see. Tom Hanks did the voiceover on this boat lift from 9/11, and it's just amazing to see regular Americans taking the time, whether they were on tugboats, whether they were on pleasure boats, whether they were on other vessels that were in the harbor, getting people off. It's just amazing. And that's the kind of relationship that we have that you're not going to see with a foreign flag vessel in any of these ports.
So there's an international aspect to this too it's also very dangerous, that's also worth bringing up. But in New York on September 11th also highlighted another interesting and underutilized, and that's the state naval militias. So there's another place to kind of look at for dealing with consequence management. Had we had in Maryland, perhaps in Baltimore, a naval militia, there might have been a little bit more immediate help, but that's still unfolding, and there'll be more lessons learned in that. But overseas, and again, this is where the reliance on overseas and foreign flag and foreign ports places us also at a strategic disadvantage, because the Chinese, either directly or indirectly, are able to have prevent us from getting pier time, getting fuel that we need, or causing cargo that we rely on to be delayed in delivery or to be processed. And so the foreign flag is just one piece of a much larger strategic danger that we face. And it's the Chinese have the wherewithal, they have the market share in shipping, they have the presence in the ports, and they have the merchant mariners that they dominate this market space, and we're over-reliant on it. And so it's more than just here domestically, which there's a whole host of other problems, illegal fishing in our own EEZs. That's a Coast Guard. We need to grow our Coast Guard, not just for the regulatory piece, but also for maritime security. And to your question, I mean, it normally takes a crisis to actually get things moving. We're in a strategic crisis, and it's gonna, 2027, if you're not familiar with it, the Davidson window is one, I've done the math before it became popular. The other thing is you need to have a plan. And that's what we're here talking about. There's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of history on this, but it only works if it comes together. Well, the secret ingredient in the last piece to actually get this moving forward is you have to have leadership. And quite frankly, Congress is showing leadership, but we're going to have to now get to the hard part. That is picking a plan that's good enough to start going, that's comprehensive, and then the real tough one is where will we make the bets and where will we pay the bills? So thanks.
I could just, one more piece of, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr.
I was just
Chairman.
going to say, make sure you turn your mic on, because we're recording this, so we can't remember everything you're saying. So we want to make sure we transcribe it properly.
Just going to say one more piece of straight talk to Congressman Ezel's point. So I'm here advocating for the Jones Act as the foundation of our national maritime security strategy. But I also want to really be clear. The Jones Act is necessary. It is not sufficient to solve the problem we're talking about here, because the Jones Act is about domestic transportation. The Jones Act is about making sure that we control our supply chain. And God help us if we lose the ability to move cargo between U.S. ports. Think of the Colonial Pipeline situation, where but for U.S. tugs and barges moving cargo between cities in our heartland, we would have been in really bad trouble. So the Jones Act is foundational. Every now and then you will hear somebody say, well, obviously the Jones Act's not working because, we just talked about the decline in the U.S. flag international fleet. Totally different issue. The Jones Act is not about growing our international fleet. It's about controlling our supply chain and providing a critical nucleus of shipbuilding capacity, mariners, and vessels. We've got to do more. And so I just appreciate the support here and also the clarity. And just when you hear that, politely, call horse hockey on that, because it's not real. And I think it's really important that we focus on the problem that we're trying to solve, and that is making sure that we've got the ability to counter this Chinese threat, which we are not going to be able to do without real clarity of purpose and a comprehensive strategy that flows from that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I got to tell you how refreshing and insightful it is to hear from you, all your different points of views as representatives from the maritime industry from various sectors. And I know the answer to my question has largely already been addressed in terms of increasing shipbuilding and mariner workforce and what have you, but how can we increase cargo and business for U.S. flag vessels? Mr. Johnson, you mentioned you had ideas. Love to hear more ideas from you. Part of this is a rhetorical question because we know a lot of the answers, but I'd love to hear from you firsthand. And before you dive into it, starting with Mr. Johnson, then everybody else on the panel, I want to encourage you all, just like us members of Congress get together and try to put together a stew in legislation. There's some mention of draft bills that are out there. I think it would be great if all of you from the industry could get together and put together a diverse white paper that touches on all these issues as a strategic plan for us lawmakers to consider. Not just somebody putting together a bill and consulting with some of you and not others and some of your favorite stakeholders, but the entire stakeholders, and include a white paper that is comprehensive, that helps us better the proposals we put forward as legislation so that it could be comprehensive to raise the sense of urgency, start calling it a crisis, so that we as lawmakers first can get on the same page in understanding that and bring the American people along, because you're right. I think the American people take it for granted, just like they do for the food that comes to our tables, the farm workers that do the job that no other Americans want to do. So with that, how can we increase cargo and business for U.S. flag vessels?
Congressman, thank you for that question. First of all, USA Maritime is hard at work on just what you're talking about, a comprehensive white paper with specific concrete proposals. We don't have it quite ready, but we're going to have it shortly, and it will address a lot of the issues that we've discussed today. With regard to how to create a more favorable marketplace for commercial cargo to move on U.S. flag ships, we are going to propose incentives. We don't think it's going to work to necessarily put mandates legislatively on folks to ship American. We prefer to give, with Congress's blessing, incentives. So we're talking about various tax incentives. If you ship American, you could get a certain tax incentive for having moved your cargo on a U.S. flag ship. We're talking about a plan under which companies who ship American can get more substantial deductions when they file their taxes. You know, when you look at the practical nature of it, these companies that Brian was referring to that are shipping millions of tons from the United States on foreign flag vessels, they have been in the habit of shipping foreign, unfortunately, for a long time. And we are going to have to, with your help and the industry's hard work, go to these folks and give them the proper incentive and to make it clear to them that it's not only in their patriotic interest, but it's in their commercial interest to ship American. And so we're going to need the help of Congress to enact some of these Ship American incentives, and we will have some specific ideas on that for you. I know that taxation isn't in the jurisdiction of this committee, but any help that you all would provide in that regard would be very much appreciated. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in.
And to, well, real quick.
go ahead.
To Chris's point, that's the carrot. I don't have a problem with having a stick too. And the bottom line is, cargo preference laws that apply to the government are great. Right now, we carry about 50% of all the foreign aid cargo. It should be 100%. We carry 100% of the defense cargo. We should carry, if the taxpayers are paying for it, period, it should go on an American ship. This should not even be anything we have to debate, all right? But I say we have the tax incentives, we talk to the shippers, we find out from them what they need to make us a priority, and we give them the chance to do that. And if it doesn't work, then the stick comes in. In the late 70s, we were able to pass through the House and the Senate the first commercial cargo preference law that applied to non-governmental cargo. It was applied to crude oil. It's like 9%. It got pocket vetoed by President Ford, and it died, and that's the last we've talked about it. But the bottom line is, if we can't convince our shippers to do the right thing, then at some point we have to tell them they need to do the right thing. And I think that's something we should start talking about again that we have not talked about in almost my lifetime. And Congresswoman Schulten has been waiting to talk for like this entire time. I'm going to shut up.
No, it's fine. I think this microphone is not really working, so I'll step over here. Thank you all so much. This is just such an important topic. I couldn't agree more. 0.4 is such a staggering number. We cannot let China eat our lunch. And in West Michigan, in my district, we are so proud to play a small role. Michigan Wheel is the world's leader in dynamic custom propellers. We make a custom propeller for Coast Guard fast response cutter that's assembled in Mr. Graves' state. I believe it's Mr. Scalise's district. But you know, the picture that you painted of these hardworking maritime shipbuilders just going along, getting it done with such minimal resources is exactly what I saw when I had the opportunity to visit Michigan Wheel in my district and just see how they are, quietly protecting our national security at home with the bare minimum resources. These are the types of companies that we should be elevating, the type of workers who we should be elevating in this critical industry. It strikes me, we've all mentioned it, the workforce issue is just so critical. Mr. Johnson, you hinted a little bit at it. We need some other, specially designed academies open to any and all ideas. How do we recruit, train, get people interested in this industry and get more workers in this field?
Look, I think the first thing that needs to be done is we need to create a better environment so that young people who are in high school or looking to where they're going to go to college and they have to choose between a regular college, a trade school, or a state maritime academy, or even applying to Kings Point, they need to have some greater assurance that there's not only going to be an industry, but there's a future for them. And so I think it ties in with everything else that's been said in terms of having the government support and having that clear definition of how important the maritime industry is. I think the unions would tell you very, very simply, if we're going to have the ships, if we're going to embark on a new national maritime strategy with a goal toward dramatically increasing the number of ships flying the American flag, and we have that cargo base to support that, they will go out there and they will continue to recruit. They'll double and triple their efforts. And if the ships are there, the mariners will be there. We don't have the mariners today because we don't have the vessels. And we're losing vessels, and we're losing more and more cargo to whether it to be China or flag or convenience operations and the like. So I think that's part of the whole equation. We need to do what we're doing here today, create that environment, make the maritime industry, it needs to demonstrate that there is a future. And then I think it'll be a little bit easier then to begin to recruit mariners and to provide that workforce. But Chris is absolutely right. With a little bit of luck as we go forward, we'll need more than the state maritime academies that we have today. Maybe we need to ideally double the number of academies. and then address the issues that go into the Maritime Academy. There's a number of workforce issues that preclude people from going to the academies, especially from a disadvantaged area, because it's expensive to go. Congress very fortunately has been addressing the fuel subsidy issue, which is very, very important because the cadets themselves are expected to pay for the fuel when they're on their training missions, which may seem to be totally out of whack in terms of what other academies do. So there's a whole number of issues there. But first and foremost, we have to demonstrate that this is a vibrant industry, and there are going to be jobs heading into the future.
And from the unlicensed standpoint, I think everything Jim said I agree with. One of the things we're finding is quality of life means more to our members, especially our newer members, than anything else. Like, 20, 30 years ago, when I got started in the industry, it was all about pay. It was all about benefits. Is my pension funded? Am I going to get paid? Kids these days coming into the ship, they don't care. Yeah, they don't care how much money you're making. Oh, because the money's great. Is there internet on the ship? Where are we going? Am I going to get shore leave? Am I going to be safe if I'm a female cadet and I'm going on one of these ships? Am I going to be safe? Or am I going to have to deal with problems? And if I do have a problem, is that going to get resolved? Those are the types of things that I think a lot of the new mariners care about more than anything else, and that's why I think we have to spend time paying attention to. And I know from our perspective, we never had to recruit. We didn't have to recruit. It was a very family-oriented thing. We've got multi-generational maritime families in our union. We've got multi-generational families in the industry, regardless of whether you're union or not. That was a standard thing. My dad went to sea, my granddad went to sea, I'm going to sea. That's just what it was. It's not like that anymore. And we've had to spend more time doing recruitment than we've ever had to do in the past. And I would love to see, and I don't want to be, I know Brett's going to yell at me, I don't want to be the government can solve everything guy, because I'm not one of those types of people. But I will tell you, having we see commercials for the Army, we see commercials for the Navy, we see commercials for the Air Force, we see commercials for the Marine Corps. You have never seen a commercial for the Merchant Marine saying, hey, can we join the Merchant Marine, see the world? I mean, we don't do that anymore. It would be great if MARAD, which is our promotional agency, had at least some kind of a focus on promotion of the industry as a whole and recruitment to get folks in the door to my training school, to Jim's training school, to the state academies, those types of things. To make people just know that we are a thing, we exist, and we are critical to national security. We don't do a really good job of tooting our own horn, unfortunately. We got to change that.
Let me give you a few specifics that might be helpful, because...
Can I speak just to...
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I just want to say this because it's really critical about our shipyard industry. Workforce is single biggest issue we face. The single biggest challenge we have is our workforce, hiring and retaining them. But what the shipyard industry prides themselves on is we have apprenticeship programs. We spend tens of millions of dollars training and getting that workforce in there. What we see is our entry-level folks who might be a painter, a blaster, a machinist, you name it. Those people want careers in the shipyard industry because we actually have careers. And when we have boom and bust cycles, obviously folks go away. To get to a supervisor in a shipyard takes about a 5 to 8 year period. To be a project manager takes about 5 to 8 years. Well, if you lose that welder because we were going through boom and bust cycles, we never get that future management. So from the shipyard industry, and it's a wonderful story you told about about the fact that it ends up in Lockport and is going on in FRC, that's amazing. That's what's so impactful about the shipyard industrial base is our supply chain hits all 50 states. The fact that Michigan to Louisiana, that's an amazing story. That's the story of the shipyard industry. And the last thing I'll say on that, any proposals to ramp up shipbuilding, we've seen this in our industry. We see that demand signal, we will make the investments, we will build, we will reconfigure our shipyards, we will expand our shipyards. You're seeing that in some of the other shipbuilding programs that are going on right now. But training up that workforce is the single biggest challenge and focus of our industry.
The points I wanted to make is, one, invest in the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. I mean, that's an easy one that Congress can do. and also elevate its senior leadership presence and awareness. The president hasn't been there for a graduation in a very long time. So that's an easy one. It doesn't cost much either. The other thing to do, of course, you've already heard, and I'll echo, is try to find ways to support the states in creating their own maritime academies, but also even looking at naval militias, which could be an adjunct to the National Guard. That's a mutual benefit for your military, but also the local, and it provides a job as well as an educational experience for folks to get into the wider maritime. So there's a few things there. Then you have the issue, and I'll come back to, and I'll connect this to your question about how do you get more cargo. Well, the problem is there's not enough ships. We frequently have to have Jones Act waivers to meet urgent needs. The reason for that is because there's not a ship or crew available. And then in the military, we also have this problem. We do turbo activation exercises, snap drills, that we have problems with the crew being there in time, as well as the material condition of these very aged ships, or the ship's just not available. It comes back to, it's the cargo, of course, but you got to have the ship and the people. It doesn't work if you're missing one of those three things. So the ships are connected deeply to this because you have to have the jobs. Education and building your first mates, I mean, that takes years. A ship can be built quicker if given the right impetus. But you got to make them all the investments at the same time so they come together later. On the point of cargo, I'll come back to the waivers, but I did want to make one point. And I do support this issue where we're looking at the type of cargo that's of a strategic importance to our nation. Energy is one. So the state of California imports a lot of its ethanol from Brazil. That might be something where you look at targeted industries where you'd rather have the product coming from the United States. There was a cargo preference outside of government. You start looking at ways you incentivize U.S. products being carried on U.S. ships. The other is oil from the Gulf of Mexico to New England. Now, you mentioned the Colonial Pipeline, and I've written also on an adjacent issue, and this is we have a fractured energy marketplace, the transport of it, as well as the production of it, getting it out of the ground. But that's a place where having adequate ships to move it from the Gulf to New England, where there isn't the adequate refineries or the pipeline connections, would also be useful. And if we were in a war, we don't have that foreign flag ships available necessarily. It's going to keep the lights on in New England, which we also have very important shipbuilding up in Bath, Maine. So I'll stop there.
Before Jennifer kills Brett, let me say, on the Jones Act waiver front, it is almost never about non-availability. These are political waivers. They're done for political. It's never about non-availability. They're political waivers. It's done to show it's an easy thing. The first thing in the playbook, let's waive the Jones Act. Does it have an impact? No. I mean, for example, we waived the Jones Act for Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. I think there were something like 12 movements of cargo that took advantage of that waiver. Not a single one of them was carrying humanitarian supplies, which all of my ships were carrying. So in the end of the day, that type of stuff, you got to keep in mind, there's a lot of that stuff out there, but it always tends to be, especially on the Jones Act when it comes to that stuff, there's more to it than what it seems. Jennifer,
I didn't want to kill Brett. That was excellent. I wanted to answer the Congresswoman's question about mariners and the workforce. So mariners are a national security asset, and we need to treat them as such. And not only do we, not do that, sometimes we trap them in a system where they have to deal with really archaic bureaucracy in order to get and maintain the credentials that enable them to do their job. So something that is within the jurisdiction of this committee and which doesn't require a comprehensive maritime security strategy, although we need that, as all of us around the table agree, the Coast Guard needs a 21st century system for issuing merchant mariner licenses and documents. For a small investment, a very small investment in the scheme of the congressional budget, we could overhaul the Coast Guard system so that you can apply for a license or an upgrade to your credential the same way you do everything else in the world, which is on the web or on your phone, and you can't go to the next screen unless you've you've filled in every box correctly. Instead of having a paper-based system where you're waiting for 6 weeks for somebody at the National Maritime Center in West Virginia to tell you that you didn't submit all the stuff that you were supposed to, and then you go to the bottom of the barrel until you submit it, and then the clock starts again. I mean, this is like 1979 technology, and that would be bad in any circumstance, but it is unconscionable when we're talking about this critical workforce. I want to be clear, fixing that is not going to solve the problem we're talking about in terms of establishing the pipeline of people who want to make this their career. We've got a lot more work to do, but we could start by fixing some things that are a massive discouragement and disincentive to the people who are working in this industry now or are thinking about it. And last thing I'll just say there, I think we've talked a little bit about maritime academies, and they are crucial. They are national security assets, but not everybody in this industry goes to or needs to go to a maritime industry. One of the things that is so cool about this industry, and one of the reasons I am so proud to have worked in it for coming up on 35 years now, is the people who make their living in it. And this is an industry where an 18-year-old young man or woman can come out of high school, within 5-7 years, they're making a 6-figure salary. They can send their kids to college when they get to that point in their life. They've got a career with benefits. They are hawse pipers. They start on the deck plate. They learn on the job. They work their way up. We need to make sure that this industry is welcoming to those folks, and they're not having to jump through crazy hoops to deal with an archaic system, that was obsolete when they were born. So just putting in, we need big ideas here, and these are some small things we could do like now, and it would be crucial.
I love that. Thank you. I also love your necklace.
Thanks. Yeah, speaking of wheels, I was going to kind of show you.
Great propellers. Yeah.
You knew it wasn't a flower or a fan. You knew what it was.
And if I could, one last thing on cargo. To your point, Mr. Congressman, there's a bill energizing American Shipbuilding Act that Garamendi and Graves and Wicker have worked on, which take a certain percentage of LNG and oil that's developed domestically. That has to go on U.S.-built, U.S.-flagged ships. I think that's a cargo bill that makes sense to me. And then lastly, concepts that, again, Mr. Graves has worked on with, tightening up what vessels can work on our outer continental shelf, either in oil and gas or renewable energy offshore.
Thank you. Two points and a couple of questions. Number one, look, the reality is that markets are always going to gravitate toward lower cost, right? And we know that, and that's why you're seeing this attraction to these foreign vessels versus U.S. Number two is, and Mr. Johnson, Mr. Paxton and I have had the chance to discuss this at length in the past, but I think we have to look at things like COVID and look at the behavior of China, where we saw China weaponize things as inexpensive but important as PPE, pulling it back and then using it effectively as ransom, charging outrageous prices. So the point there is that China will use anything that they can weaponize to injure the United States if conditions warrant, such as a war or other more adverse relationship between our countries. Which brings me to the next point. Admiral, nice to see you again under better conditions. So, one of the things that's being talked about is subsidizing. So we're coming in and we're gonna apply subsidies and try and the purpose is to help to level the playing field, right? But Admiral, I'm curious about something Mr. Paxton just sort of brought up part of this. Look, the United States has much more stringent standards for worker training, for safety, for inspections, compared to what other countries, i.e. China and others do. So we're talking about coming in and subsidizing in order to help, and this is just one of many competitiveness issues. So one thing I'd ask, Mr. Johnson, as you think about this white paper, if you're all going to collectively provide input, what about standards in the United States that may be overkill? Are there things that we're requiring in the United States that are expensive to comply with, but maybe are overkill? What can we learn from other countries where they may not have as stringent safety standards, where cost to benefit just doesn't make sense? But then similarly, I'd love to hear your thoughts on if we're allowing these ships in our waters that are not complying to the gold standard of safety that we have here, does that even make sense? I mean, does it make sense? And I don't mean to be prejudiced, we'll wait till NTSB, but the Key Bridge scenario, I don't think you would have seen a U.S. vessel have those types of mechanical issues. I'm guessing. Last thing is, Look, you talk about subsidies, but there's some bad examples. There's some bad examples of subsidies in the United States as well. And I'm not going to name names, but I think we're aware. We've made some investments in yards, and quite frankly, it was stupid. It was stupid, and it was a complete waste of taxpayer dollars. And so I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on what criteria we use to make sure that this is going to be a good return on investment for taxpayers.
Respond on the standards, because that's something I question myself. One of the strange things in my mind is that when Congress created the conditions for the Maritime Security Program, okay, so that's most of the foreign trading U.S. flagships today. They said, look, these ships just have to comply with the international standards. You flag these ships in, they're all foreign built, and make it as easy as possible so that, you know, Transcom can have these ships when they are needed for a military sea lift command. You can't use that streamlined authority. The Coast Guard is bound to still enforce the entire domestic standards on any other non-maritime security program ships that would apply for a U.S. flag. I agree, it doesn't really make sense. And I think when you've got 98% of, you know, the ships coming in and out of our ports meeting SOLAS standards, safety of life at sea standards, and all the international standards, you want to try to just get them under a U.S. flag, get a U.S. mariner on there. And I think that's something that could be done very easily. Congress already did it to create the MSP reflagging process. So you know, that would be the easy step right there. And you don't need to do it for. I mean, I guess we could debate whether that needs to be done for all the domestic ships, all the Jones Act ships. They're in a protected trade, so I think we might want to have a little higher standard for the ships and barges that are in our constant presence here. But I just don't think we should be hampering ourselves on international trade by having standards that exceed the rest of the world's standards. I think we will exceed the rest of the world just by putting those U.S. merchant mariners on.
You're 100% correct about the higher standards, and I'll give you a perfect example. Admiral Wayne Arguin, who runs the Coast Guard, some of the training stuff, does what Jim used to do, went to India, went to a training school in India, and had a conversation with the unlicensed mariner training facility there. And they were talking about the time that it takes to create an able seaman in India. And the Indians asked Admiral Arguin, why does it take so much longer to make an American able seaman than it does for us? And it was literally taking us twice as long. And it was simply because our Coast Guard regulations were written at a time when the vast majority of seagoing training was done at sea. So you had to have sea time. We don't do that anymore. We do it on simulators, we do it in classrooms, we do it on training ships. I can take a guy off the street, guy or gal, put them through my training program and turn them into a mariner in a year. But I can't make them an AB in that same time period because of the Coast Guard regulations. So what did we do? Well, we went and we were able to get a program through last year's NDAA that cut the time in half, and it still complies with all of the IMO requirements for SDCW, for Standards of Training and Certification of Watchkeeping. Our mariners are still getting just as good training as they were, but they're able to get it done in half the time. And that means we can get our guys out to sea much faster. And these are the middle rank positions that were devastated by COVID, where a lot of guys just said, I'm not going to sea anymore. I was supposed to go on a 6-month cruise. I've been here for 18 months. I'm going home. I'm not doing this anymore. And so trying to get that program back up and running has taken us a while. Our first class under the new regulations, under the new law, graduated about a month ago, and we're trying to put another 24 folks through that program 2 or 3 times a year. And we've got language in this year's NDA that it's going to make that permanent. It's not going to be a pilot, it's going to be permanent. But that's the kind of thing that we got to do. Now, again, to Jim's point, we can't do that everywhere because we don't want to race to the bottom. We don't want us to be the bottom of the barrel, lowest common denominator mariner. Our American mariners are the best in the world. We have the best training in the world. I'll put my guys up against anybody in the world. We can get the job done. But it costs money. And that's finding a way to work on that delta is critical to us being able to compete.
Things to look at. One is look at the environmental regulations like NEPA, look at OSHA, look at that and make, not to a race to the bottom, because again, I go back to the theme, don't try to out-Chinese the Chinese. It's not going to work. It's not appropriate, and I think part of that is a race to the bottom. But look at those regulations and how they apply to shipyards. One of the things that's being looked at is how do you actually create a bubble, a regulatory bubble around so you can incentivize investment and to grow new shipyards is to create like special economic zones, a maritime prosperity zone. But again, maybe you can make this not as necessary by looking more broadly, and the states have a role in this too, because layered on top or as a foundation are also state regulations that also impact or suppress investment and activity in the maritime sector. So those are two. The other thing, just a cautionary tale, because our maritime sector is so much atrophied and weak relative to the Chinese, that if we are to try to say you can't come to the United States unless you meet our high standards, we're probably going to suffer economic consequences on our side. So we're not in a position of strength and power. So we have to be very judicious about that. And unfortunately, the gentleman's also left, but the Federal Maritime Commission, FMC, I think is a role that needs to be expanded and needs more muscle at the same time, looking at smart regulations.
Congressman, if I could just jump in, I agree with everything that's been said, but what I'd really like to say is that this is the first time many of us have seen you since you have announced that you're not running for re-election, and we just want to thank you for all that you have done for this industry, and we'll miss you.
I would like to say Congress has provided $11 million for a new set of regulations for maritime, in the maritime industry. Looks like the Coast Guard is going to ask for another $11 million for this year, the 25 budget year, to continue that. So I think there's a change coming. There is, and that'll help. Also, the NDAA this last year included monies for a whole study and background and so forth of the maritime employee, and that's going to happen. That study has been awarded, and it's happening, and so I'll be interested in how that comes out too. Same thing. So we've gotten some people's attention.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
One thing to add on that, to come back to ports, this is all great, but just in the nature of straight talk, U.S. ports also need to be much more efficient and timely in turnaround. And when you look at in the global context, we're not competitive there either. So a place to also look at is how can we also try to improve the efficiencies of our shipyards, turnaround time, both in bulk cargo, container cargo, and energy, petroleum. Those metrics, we're not in the top 25, and we're not improving at the speed that we need to.
You know, offshore wind is an up-and-coming sector throughout the country, and it has the potential to bring thousands of jobs for the maritime industry. This industry is being developed off my district, off of Morro Bay, Call area. Many in the offshore wind industry do not believe that it is viable to crew with U.S. mariners or build certain vessels in the United States. Yet, Dominion has recently completed construction on a U.S.-built WT-4, and American mariners are the most capable mariners in the world, as we all know. How are discussions with the offshore wind industry going from your perspective, if there's been any, and what can be done to ensure a robust domestic offshore wind and maritime industry?
I'll take a whack at that. Before my current role at American Maritime Partnership, I chaired the Offshore Wind Committee, so I've been engaged in a lot of discussions with that industry sector, and was just up in Boston with a internationally diverse group of folks from that industry a couple of weeks ago, and I think there's been some movement on their part. Part of our message has been, and this committee really led in getting the statutory clarification that was mentioned earlier, that the Constitution and U.S. laws apply to renewable energy on the Outer Continental Shelf just as they do to oil and gas, and that includes compliance with the Jones Act. So, these are the ground rules, and stop whining about them. Get focused. Start engaging with U.S. transportation providers who are, after all, in the business of helping to meet transportation and logistics needs, and talk about what you need, and we'll do it. And the good news is there are something like 40-something vessels that are either being built or converted at U.S. yards right now. There are dozens of vessel types that need to be used on every offshore wind project, and these projects have a long life, from exploration of the ocean floor to construction of the wind farms to operation and maintenance of the wind farms, and ultimately to their decommissioning. The vast majority of vessels that are going to be needed on those jobs need to be built in U.S. shipyards. So don't complain about it, do it. I think we're making some progress there. And then, again, in the interest of straight talk, not every vessel that is going to be used on an offshore wind project needs to be built in the U.S. because not all of those vessels are engaged in transportation. Some are engaged in stationary construction. So make a business decision. Dominion made, I think, a really fantastic business decision to build a U.S. flag, U.S. built, U.S. crewed wind turbine installation vessel here, and that is terrific. A company can make a choice to build a WTIV elsewhere and use U.S. flag barges as part of that operation. Decide what makes the most sense for your business. Do it. Stop complaining about the ground rules. You're gonna comply with the ground rules in every other respect, taxes, et cetera. And it's the way it is. So I think we're making progress, but I think Congress making very clear, no. Failure to plan, failure to acknowledge the ground rules, complaining about the Jones Act or complaining about them, and then saying, oh my goodness, we don't have all the vessels we need. Well, why don't you? Because you should have contracted for them when you needed them. Ships don't materialize overnight. You've got to build them and plan. I think you all have played a really important role there, and we just ask you to keep doing that. They're getting the message.
On the offshore wind, and I'm agnostic on it. I look at it from an engineering perspective, but one of the things that I heard from the industry back in April was that the orders for new vessels, OSVs, these are the support vessels mentioned, are starting to drop off. So the demand for the shipbuilding and even for the crewing of these is starting to drop off, which is an indication of the health of this sector. That aside, I'll offer up that where demand starts to lag, there is a need in the Navy, and I would say perhaps even the Coast Guard, for this type of size vessel to do operations in the Pacific Ocean, but also perhaps in the Caribbean, and that's the large unmanned surface vessel. Now, Navy's delayed the procurement for this, but the technology and a lot of what goes into the systems that get these ships at sea, they're offshore vessels. And you can actually then install the unmanned capability to it or be optionally manned. So there's an interesting relationship between those two, between naval shipbuilding and the Navy and the offshore wind, notably the OSV sector, that needs to be looked at because demand's dropping off as it is right now, and the Navy needs vessels that can be used as a weapon carrier or as a sensor carrier, as we're proven with Task Force 59 and 5th Fleet in the Persian Gulf.
Mr. Carbonell, I'd like to reference back to your comment about the strategic white paper that should be collectively done. And it's important, in my opinion, that we package this as a profession that goes across all the boundaries of Navy, Coast Guard, industry, shipbuilding, merchant mariners, manufacturers of equipment in the supply chain. We need to do what you suggested as opposed to zeroing in on one particular place within the maritime industry and working on that and then considering that as a different subject than Navy or unmanned vessels or nuclear power. I mean, this is, when you enter this industry, And you could start, I was down at Piney Point, you could start right there. There's no boundaries in this industry. It's a wonderful place to ultimately become a ship owner, to ultimately own a shipyard, to actually, broker shipping contracts. There's so many different pathways to success through this that we don't publicize and we don't talk about with our high schoolers and with people that are at that point of choosing their career. And I think if we package it up, it all comes down to, though, is there a future? And that comes down to cargo. We've said it over and over again, that if you have that American cargo, either coming or going, more of it on U.S. flagships, and then you package up this profession, you're going to get the best and brightest of America to join this industry, and we'll be in much better shape than we are now.
Congressman, from the labor perspective on the wind thing, very quickly, we're working on it. We've been talking to the companies for a long time. We're working on it. We're trying to get ready. We're going to have to recruit for these positions. A lot of these positions are going to be up in the Northeast. A lot of the state programs that many of these operators are operating under have content requirements that include employees. So we got to go up and recruit, and then we got to train folks, and we got to know what we're training them to do. So we're talking to the offshore folks, but it's all going to come down to when they're ready to start putting an oar in the water, so to speak. We'll be ready to have the mariners there, but it's really one of these things where it's just we're kind of in a holding pattern until they figure out the other issues that they're dealing with.
And just one other observation. In the height of the oil industry, we had about 3,800 offshore oil rigs platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. That market was so understood that those were Jones Act ships that had to go out to those 3,800 offshore platforms, that we were building offshore support vessels and all sorts of different classes of ships that were going back and forth every day. We were building so many of those ships, sir, that we are exporting about $500 million a year of these ships to West Africa and Brazil and other places. So when the market is legally enforced and good, we will produce. Last comment on that, when it's not enforced, as in a recent letter ruling by Customs Border Patrol, one of our shipyards was going to build up to three pretty complex scour protection vessels. They're going to only build one now because CBP, interpreted the law incorrectly of what this committee did. So I would just say when the law is enforced and there's certainty there, our shipyards step up and we build world-class ships.
That ends our time here today. Thank you all for coming, our expert panelists. And we thank the members that came and asked good, pointed questions. And we shared a lot of information. We really appreciate it. Just know it's part of the record, and we're going to try to act on it. So thank you so much for what you've done. Good to see all of you. And I guess we don't adjourn. We just end the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you.
He didn't ask me a pointed question, so he gave me the
I didn't have a chance. No, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.